Gracchi Brothers, Part 1, Problems Post-Punic Wars. If you have a question, leave it in a comment below. After the Punic Wars, we see an increase in public land from these new territories that have been conquered. That's primarily what's happening as Rome is expanding. It's like, once they conquer a town, it no longer is owned by the people who are there because many of them have been sold into slavery. And so the government of Rome takes that land into public use. The thing is that how Rome makes money off of this land is that they either sell it off or they rent it. And the thing that ends up happening is a lot of wealthy Romans end up buying up a lot of this land, or they rent it out at rates that they end up not even paying. And so with that happening, as well as the increase of slaves from these conquests, means that wealthy Romans are buying up a lot of land and a lot of slaves to work that land. And so the system that had previously existed, where a wealthy Roman would own land and then they would hire plebeians primarily to then work that land at a fee, for a fee, they now are being, these plebeians are being replaced by slaves. And so now we have this situation where we have people that are now had been fighting to conquer these lands and now are getting nothing for it. And this leads into a kind of dire political situation, particularly after the Third Punic War. Many politicians start to realize that economic relief is going to be very important. This primarily is because of the fact that many of the soldiers who had fought in Africa, in Greece, in Spain, and the like, are returning home with spoils of war. But the thing is that their family farms that because these are all citizen farmers, there is no professional army at the time. Their farms are left abandoned because their families, without them being there, were not able to keep the farms going and had to sell them off to stay alive. So when they return home, there is no home to return to. And so, even though that there are attempts by politicians to alleviate these debts, try to get people back onto their farms, because of the fact that a lot of wealthy Romans had bought up these farms, the politicians who try to push the idea of letting people have their farms back are met with strong opposition by these wealthy individuals who have bought these farms up. And so, since these soldiers now have nowhere to go, they end up flooding into Rome as urban poor, because they've lost all that they have, and they're having to subsist off of what money that they were able to scrounge up during these conflicts abroad. But that money goes quite quickly. Now, right before the Second Punic War, we have our display here of roughly what the Roman population looked like and how it was divided up. So a significant number of people. And this comes down to in how Rome is actually paying for all the things that all these conflicts and the like that they're doing. So each one of these squares represents about 1,000 people. So we have about 300 people in the Senate. Our equites that we talked about that have been developing during this time period are at about 1,800. And then we have our foot soldiers, which account for about 800,000. And then we have our capite censi, or proletariat, basically poor people, who are about 100,000. So during this time period, it's the ability for Rome to field a large army is significant. And this is just the city of Rome itself, not including all of its allies throughout Italy. And so these assidui, or taxpayers, are the people who are paying for all of these things. And they all fall within the group of people who can actually afford to basically man themselves. Though as we see, the proletariat are still Roman citizens, they just don't have the money. And then, of course, we have our slave population, which comes out to about 250,000. And we believe that the population is roughly equal between men and women in all these different groups. Now, as you see, it's like we do have our allied communities and the like that could be brought into these different groups as well. Now, this leads us into the fact that, okay, we have, at least before the Second Punic War, a significant population to pull from with arms. And it's after the conflict, when these people now have no money, that really is having huge military repercussions. Because, as I have mentioned before, they are citizen soldiers. They are farmers being pulled up from their farms just to fight. And so there ends up being requirements for military service because of this idea of the citizen militia. So the idea is basically the government does not pay for your arms. You are to pay for them yourself. And so there are minimum property requirements to be a Roman soldier. Because basically the idea in the ancient world is if you have money, you have more to lose if in a conflict. And therefore you are the one that needs to be fighting to protect your homes. And so this basically comes into the idea of having a system where we have people in two tiers. The lower tier is basically so poor they are no longer required to serve because they don't have the money to buy the weapons and armor and the like to equip themselves. The thing is that with more and more people losing their livelihoods, more and more people are starting to fall into that economic category. And this is what a lot of the politicians are seeing as the issue. It's the idea that, oh, we are losing our manpower. We have the people, but we don't have enough of them that actually can serve to fight. And so they try to start loosening the requirements, but because the economic ties get harder and harder, the people are starting, more and more people are still falling below even these lower requirement lines. Now, this is basically what these requirements look like. This is how Rome is broken up into our economic classes. We have our equestrians, as we've talked about before, who are basically anybody who made over 100,000 os a year, as we have our coin here. An os is the basic unit of the Roman monetary system now. We'll get into more detail about that in a sec. And so the equites are expected that it's like you have enough money, you should be able to buy and be able to take care of a horse, have full armor for yourself, as well as various weapons. Now, as we move down our classes, it's less and less is expected of a person. In our first class, people who make up to 100,000 os a year, they should be able to fully armor themselves and have some weapons. They no longer seem to be able to afford to maintain a horse. In class 2, it's up to 75,000 os a year. They should be able to have a full armor and almost full armor and some weapons. Then we drop down to class 3 with 50,000 os a year. They should have some sort of armor to protect themselves and a few weapons. Then we have class 4, now dropping down to 25,000 os a year. They might have very little armor, only a few weapons. Then we drop down to class 5 with 11,000 os a year. These people no longer can afford any armor, but should be able to have at least one weapon to defend themselves. Anybody making less than 11,000 os a year is considered the proletariat. It's like most of you have probably heard that more associated with Karl Marx and communism, but that's just where he's pulling that from. Basically, it's a catch-all term for poor. And these people, because they don't make that much money, are expected that they can't afford even a single weapon to defend themselves. And so the problem is that more and more people are falling into that class. And that is where the economic problems are arising. Now, to look at our Roman denominations of coins, we have our os here to give you an idea of the kind of base units of coinage, and basically what is each one worth, basically, as compared to our base unit of the os. To give you an idea of size for these, our quadrans is about the size of a dime. So it's like to give you kind of an idea of how big each of these different coins are. So with our os being our base unit, many of our other denominations when we talk about different amounts of money are either going to usually be in sesterci, which make up 4 osses, or the denarius, which is 4 sesterci. So you get the idea of how these are kind of building up on themselves. As well as we will see in different points some aureus, some aurei, which is worth 25 denarii, and later on we'll see even an Antoninus, uh, which are supposed to be a double denarius, a 2 denarii. But we'll go into more detail about that much later. But besides the idea of dime, we also have our scales on the side here of 1 inch and centimeter to give you kind of rough idea of how large these different coins are. Now, the main way that politicians are trying to decide the best situation, instant ways to actually solve these different problems, is through the idea of public land, our agir publicus. So there were already laws on the books that were supposed to basically define how public land was supposed to be used. We talked about the idea already of that wealthy people are buying up this land. They're supposed to be limited to a certain amount of it. The thing is, a lot of these individuals are using chicanery in order to basically have more than they should. And so the initial limit is that of 500 eugra. A eugra is 500 euros is about 325 acres. So this is how much for one individual. So in our modern sense, 325 acres is a lot of land, and that's for one individual. If that man has sons, he is able to add up 250 eugra for each son, up to 1,000 eugra. So we have a person who could own up to almost 1,000 acres of land. So that's a significant territory to be able to farm and make a livelihood off of. And these wealthy individuals are exceeding even that number and having these huge estates that are bringing them in massive amounts of wealth that they are then working by using slaves and not hiring people that are Roman citizens to do that work. And so they are creating these kind of closed shop systems where the money is going into their pockets and their pockets alone. So in 367 BCE, most of this public land in Italy is in the north, and that's primarily being sold to wealthy families, while in the south it is often being leased. These wealthy families are supposed to be following these limitations, but they are basically coming up with fake names and saying it's like, oh, well, actually, my brother's cousin, sister's uncle is doing this instead, not me. And so it basically flaunts the law in all these different ways and makes it that poor individuals can't buy into the market because all the land is being hoarded among the very wealthy. Okay. If you need to go back to the previous video, that is available to you. If you are ready to head on to the next one, that is available to you as well. If you have any questions during this whole video, leave it as a comment below.